You are listening to How to Get Over Your Ex, episode number 244, How to Feel Like Yourself Again After a Breakup. Welcome to How to Get Over Your Ex, a podcast on getting over your ex without it just taking time. I'm your host, Breakup Coach Dorothy. Let's turn your pain into power and your heartbreak into happy. Hello, beautiful brave hearts. How is everybody doing? I'm so excited to have you here today. Today's episode is going to be really fun and really different. I've never once done an episode with someone I've never met or been on Zoom with before. So this is really exciting because I am meeting Shay today for the first time, at least face to face. We've chatted, in chats and you were just in the 5-day training, so I got a little bit of a feel for you there. But Shay is actually someone who signed up for the Get Over Your Ex course, which is curriculum only. And I wanted her to come on and talk about her journey and her experience because she did the course. She was working through the course. I could see her progress as she was working through the course. And then it was just really cool that by the 5-day training, she was kind of like wrapping that up. And so watching you interact in the 5-day training too was also very cool. And then hearing your feedback was just so great. So I wanted to come on to the podcast, have you talk about your experience and have Bravehearts learn about your breakup journey. And of course, any nuggets of wisdom that they can take from your journey and take on their own would be really, really great. So thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Dorothy. It was a,
Yeah.
it was a really cool experience to first find the podcast. Due to my friend Kat, actually, she was the one who turned me on to all of this. And she's like, you got to listen to this girl. She's unbelievable. Even if you're still in a relationship, she just helps you figure out how to make your life better. And I was like, all right, that's a good message for every woman ever. So I downloaded the podcast when I was actually on a solo trip to Scotland back in October. And I was so scared to listen to it because I felt like my relationship was in a kind of not great area. And I knew that it would take more work, but I'm like, I'm fully on board. We've been together almost 4 years. I'm doing this. So I get home from Scotland. I've got your podcast on my phone, but I haven't listened to it. And I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty detailed background of all that, but 2 weeks before our 4-year anniversary, my now ex was on a trip in Germany and he came back from that and was staying with a friend in Atlanta and called me and was like, it's over. So I was pretty much crushed at that point. And I went into a sort of retreat mode. I just moved into my new place and completely separate. I'll get into all that in a couple minutes, but I just moved into my new place, no internet, nothing to do but listen to podcasts. So I binged your entire podcast in the span of about, I would say a month total, where I was doing nothing but listening to the podcast, doing puzzles, trying to pick up the pieces of my life in metaphorically by putting together actual puzzles. The podcast really opened up everything because I felt like at one point when I was sitting there working on the puzzle for the first time, I walked into my new house. Like I had not been me for 3 out of the 4 years of our relationship. And that was such a mind blowing, I know you call them aha moments. That was the biggest one for me. And that sort of opened the door to, okay, I need to dedicate time to go through your program and figure out a way to actually invest in myself because I've put myself on the back burner for so long. It's time to do this. Then all of a sudden you come up with this, hey, you can do the curriculum only thing. And it was like the proverbial angels were singing. It was meant for me. So I've been having a really tough time at work because my ex and I still work together and we interact at every event that I'm at. And it's not every week, but when it is, it's full on. So I was having a really tough time at one of the events and I heard your podcast about, hey, you can sign up and do the curriculum only and go at your own pace. I was like, take my money. I need this desperately. So I laughed actually when you said you were watching my progress because I'm sure you were sitting there going, what is this girl doing? Like, does she not have a life? Is she just sitting here and banging through all of the workshops? And the answer was yes. Yes, I was.
And I love that though. Like I love that. I mean, think about it. So I've been looking at I just did this last round of the 5 day training because I think you were in the 5 day training that happened in February, no?
I was.
Yeah, so you were in the training in February. I'm sure I rolled out the launch of the Get Over Your Ex program, and then that was the first time we were like, "Hey, we should try the curriculum only version. We can offer it, and if it's not a fan favorite, we don't have to keep it. It's fine." Um, and so when we made that offer, I was like, "But how?" I'm so hands-on with my clients that the course version like freaked me out a little bit. I'm just gonna be honest, right? Where I'm like so hands-on with my clients. So I'm like, how do I see that they're making progress? Like I want to make sure that they're making progress. And um that my VA was like, well, why don't you just add these boxes on here and you can like ask them were your questions answered? Did you have anything open-ended? What's going on? And it doesn't mean you have to respond to them, but you can at least like look and see and watch where they're at and watch what's going on. And so I get an email every time someone's like completing a section or completing a thing. And so your name would pop up very frequently. And I'm like, so I started, it's funny though, right? Because it's kind of like you built a relationship with me through the podcast. And I built a relationship with you through watching your progress, and neither of us knew about it. So I think that that's kind of cool and fun in its own way. And then, yeah, you were here in this last 5 day training, which I thought was so cool. So I guess I'm curious. Tell us a little bit about like your breakup journey. Tell us where you started. I wanted to know, what did you really struggle with? Because number one, like he broke up with you on the phone. That seems eerily like similar to my situation.
Yeah.
Right? So the breakup over the phone, how long were you dating? And what were you struggling with like the most when it came to your breakup?
Well, we started dating back in the end of 2019, right before COVID kicked off, of course. And I'm a Florida girl. I'm from Miami. I've never lived outside of the state of Florida. And long story short, I came out for a 2 week trip to Utah and then COVID happened. So I wound up getting stuck out here for 4.5 months. And it was to the point where I had a condo in Fort Lauderdale and I could go back to it, but my parents lived a mile away. And I knew that if I went back, they weren't going to stay away. They weren't going to respect the, hey, let's wait 2 weeks and make sure that I'm not sick or bringing you anything. So I wound up staying in Utah from the beginning of March until the end of July. And when I went back to Florida, half the people in my building had died. So it like triggered this panic in my brain of, why in the world would I want to live in a building with a couple hundred people when I could live in Utah and be outside and enjoy life? So it basically triggered me in a sense to then move out here. And that actually started the problem in the relationship because when I was moving out here, my ex he has a bunch of friends and he doesn't see any difference between guys or girls as far as friendship goes. So he took a friend down to Moab, which is where we had been stuck together. And it freaked me out, Dor, because I thought all of a sudden, all right, I'm not enough as I am. I need to be who he needs. So basically, the Shay that moved to Utah was not me. And that's why when I said I was working on the puzzle, I felt like all of a sudden I walked back through the door. It's because I realized I'd been missing for 3 years. And that was this huge panic in my brain. But we were together for just shy of 4 years. We had a great relationship. When I look back on it, I have no regrets. My regret was not being me for the majority of it, but nothing really, there wasn't anything wrong, which was why when it ended, I felt so lost. And yeah, he ended it over the phone, and for 2 and a bit weeks, we didn't see each other. There was no contact, there was nothing. And I went in full, like off the deep end depression mode. I stopped eating. I lost close to 15 pounds in 2 weeks. Went to a party with him a few weeks later because it was an end of season thing and his bosses wanted me to go. And I showed up and people were like, whoa, something's not okay with you. We still spent Christmas together because we were still talking things out. We were working things out. And the day before we left for our first big event of this year, we were still together. We weren't dating, but we were still together. And I was under the impression that We'd been honest with each other. We were working through things. I'm me again. And that was the big breakthrough that came after the breakup. And that's part of why it was kind of easier to forgive him for that. And I don't hold any ill will. But I was so lost when we then got to our event in January. And we were basically all of a sudden things are completely silent and he's treating me like I don't exist. And I had said to him, I'm not, because his thing was, I want to still be your friend. I just don't want to be your boyfriend. And I said, well, that's not how it works. You don't get both. You either get me or you don't. Sorry. Which is still the situation now. And if he were to reappear and try and be my friend, that's still it. And he said to me that I deserve better. And I didn't know what he meant because to me, things had been fine. But now I understand after studying so much of the stuff and going through the course and reading Attached, which by the way, I know you talk about that book. Oh, holy cow, that changed everything in my life. I know that he's avoidant and I know that he has enmeshment issues and I know that there are a lot of things for him to work through. And I have worked through my stuff and I continue to work through my stuff with the help of the course. But I felt so broken that I didn't know where to even begin to try and find myself again. And I still struggle with, there are days where it's hard and it's like, well, I'm never going to find someone like him again. And the answer is, yeah, you're not. But you don't want that. You want someone different and to create a want list and to try and start to think about the dating process. Like it's terrifying, but I also feel like now I have the tools in my kit to be able to approach it.
So good, right? I mean, like you have the tools to feel terrified, to allow yourself to feel terrified and not be afraid of it. Like even the way that you said it, I know, people listening can't see you, but I watch you and I'm like looking at you and your demeanor is like when you said that, you weren't like, yeah, I might feel terrified. Like it might be terrifying or scary, but your energy around it doesn't feel terrified or scared. You're like, yeah, I might feel that, but I'm not like afraid to feel scared.
Yeah, because now I know how to do it. And I mean, it's funny, you mentioned the 5-day training. So I was in Australia when that was going on, and the timetable was just horrific to try and jump on the calls live.
Yeah.
So I had this handy dandy notebook with me, and I would sit in the media center of this amazing racetrack and listen to your calls back the next day and go through and take notes. And so I started this habit of taking notes on everything. And I'll show you because this is video for you and me, but for the listeners at home, there's about 75 pages, and a lot of them are front and back, as far as stuff going through not only just the courses, but then the program. And every single time I would sit down to watch a video or go through something, and I did the notebook too. I mean, I've got that too, but I would just take copious amounts of notes. And then at the end of all of it, I was able to write up sort of an abbreviated version of like a what I need to remember kind of thing. And that's 2 pages front and back too. But it's like having a tangible thing to go back and look at, to take a picture of it and put it on my phone and then just flip through it when I'm traveling or whatever, to be able to remember like, hey, you've got everything you need now to be the bigger, better person to make everything happen. That to me is honestly invaluable.
So good, right? Because that's what it's all about though, is it's not just about getting over your ex. It is about the bigger and better life. And it's not about getting to an outcome. Like the outcome is great. I love creating the outcome of like, I'm over my ex and I have my bigger and better life. But it is so much about the journey and it's so much about the skill set that you're learning and that you're developing. You're not just learning it, you're developing. I literally just recorded a podcast this morning and it's so short. It's 7 minutes. And I'm just like, I am seeing the difference after doing this 5-day training. I'm seeing the difference between people who learn information with the purpose of knowing the information versus the people who learn information with the purpose of mastering it. And mastering it cannot happen if you don't practice it, if you don't implement it. And that's such a different experience. And I don't know, it just like You right there and what you just experienced and what you just said, that's the difference to me. That's the difference between knowing information versus implementing it and mastering it and knowing that you've learned, quote unquote, learned enough. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And the best example of that I can give is release writing. Because I watched the videos and I went through and learned about the grief bubble and release writing and trying to figure out all these ways to try and help yourself when you just feel so overwhelmed. And I had one of those when we were again going to an event just a month ago in California, and he was on my flight, and it was the first time that I had been in the same space as him in 2 months. And I got on the plane and sat down and like, whew, moment of just complete overwhelm. And on this flight also, by the way, were like 10 friends and one of my best girlfriends in the entire world. So I sit down on the plane and I'm like, okay, tools. What do I have? What can I do? What can I use? Release writing. So I took out a notebook that I had for work for all kinds of random racing notes in it. I sat down to an empty page. I took my pen out and I was like, let the emotion take over. So I did. And it was a short flight. It was only an hour and a half. I wrote the entire time. And when I finished writing, tore the pages out of my notebook and went, I have no way of getting rid of this right now. I'm on a plane. What do I do? So I then was hit with another moment of panic of, oh my God, every time we travel together, they wait, he and his mom wait for me when we get off the plane. They're going to be waiting. They're in first class. They're ahead of me. They're going to be waiting. How do I get past this? So I I took my folded up paper and I put it in my backpack like nothing had happened, got off the plane and ran straight for the bathroom that was across from the gate. Went in the bathroom, closed myself in a little cubicle, tore up the paper in as many tiny little pieces as I could, threw it in the trash bin, washed my hands, walked away, and I felt like I could deal. It was the most lifting process. And all of a sudden, I'm like, you know what? It's fine. I can handle this weekend. I can do this. I can do my job. I can be professional. It's fine. And it was.
Oh my God, I love it. That was magic. Absolute magic. What a great example. I mean, come on. And what great practice. Like, of course you were on the same like flight. Of course that had to happen. Like, that is so amazing. I'm obsessed. Thank you for sharing it. That was so good.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so I also want to know what were some of you talked about, the main big mind-blowing moment of doing the puzzle and realizing like I just haven't been myself for 3 years. What are some other big mind-blowing moments that you had and like how did you arrive to them?
Well, through different ones of your programs, through different courses and workshops, lovability was a huge one for me because the realization that I didn't do anything wrong. Like if anything, I gave too much. I didn't ask for anything back, but I didn't, again, I didn't know. And I didn't know that I wasn't being true to me. So the whole lovability thing was like, well, if I give everything and he still doesn't love me, then what the hell? Like there's no hope. And then to have that realization of no, lovability has nothing to do with you. You are lovable. You are worthy. Fundamentally, it's about the other person and their ability to love. To me, that was, whew, yeah, like a giant sense of relief. And I'm sure you can even hear it now. You harp on and on about how life is only 50% good because if you're lucky, it's 50% good because it makes you appreciate it. So when I was sinking down lower than the Titanic, all of a sudden I'm getting this feeling of, well, of course I'm going to feel downtime because life has been generally so good for such a long time. Of course there's going to be a down point. That it happens. It's natural. Um, the realization I created every good thought I ever had about him. It was like,
So good. It's such a
hello.
yes. Mm-hmm.
Suffering being an option, that was again a big thing of like, well, hey, I might feel this way because of the thoughts I'm having, which again, thoughts and feelings, like, yeah, just that is a cornerstone. But I don't have to suffer through it, and it's not actually helping anyone. Which led into like shame spirals and learning about that and shoulding all over yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't help anyone.
Yep.
And I do it all the time because that's just where that little dark voice in the back of your head goes. But it's a choice and it's all about how you look at things. So that was pretty big.
Yes. I think the biggest thing of like recognizing there's so much that is our choice. Like,
Yeah,
yes, of course, in the world, there are going to be things that happen that we don't have control over. And there are things within our body that we don't have control over, like hormones and chemicals and all kinds of stuff. But there is still so much that we do have control over. And when you're too focused on all the things you don't get to control, you lose sight of the things that you do get to control. And I think for you, what I'm hearing you say is it almost like I feel like it brought attention and focus and awareness to all the things that you had control over in your life in a moment that perhaps felt uncontrollable.
for sure. And I'm thoroughly Capricorn. I mean, I like to have a process and I like to know what I'm doing. So to not have any control over the situation because it wasn't my choice, it wasn't what I wanted. And then to realize, well, why don't you treat it like it was your choice? Why don't you look at it from the different view? Intentional thought. Like all of those lessons, Dorothy, they rocked my world and it
So
just
good.
changed everything.
I love the question that you just said, though, that like, what if I looked at this if it was my choice? Oh my gosh, Braveheart's listening. That is such a great journal prompt. Like, what if I know this feels like it's not my choice, but what if I looked at it as if it was? Then what? Because how different might your experience be? So good. I love that. You can even do that for, I'm thinking about it within so many, like, we've been talking a lot about attachment and all of these things. So I'm sitting here thinking, like, what if it was my choice to be single and I approached it that way? What if it's my choice to not have children and if I approached it that way, right? Like start acting as if you chose the cards that you've been dealt and how different might your experience of them be while you're still continuing to work towards what you want.
Yeah, and the whole thing about like choosing how you think about the past too, that was something that was huge because the past is past. I loved how you said at one point something about don't argue with the past because you're going to lose every time, but you can choose how you think about it. So if you have feelings of embitterment or negativity or all of this stuff regarding your breakup, you can then look at it from a different perspective from, okay, instead of what have I lost, what have I gained? And that's kind of where I got to maybe halfway through the curriculum and going through all that. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, well, I didn't choose the breakup. I wouldn't choose the relationship that we had ever again, but I know I won't attract that again because I'm a different person. But if he were to come back into my life, he needs to prove that he is worthy because he said that he wasn't to begin with and that I deserve better. So, what has he done to change while all this time I've been evolving and leveling up? Has he been doing any of that? Answer is no, because we still have a million mutual friends and his mom is still like obsessed with being in my life. But it's such a I don't know, it feels like the sun is shining almost because all of a sudden I can choose how I view the past. And none of the experiences that I had with him were negative. And I still do miss my best friend. I miss that connection that we had. So for that reason, I feel like I'm not over him necessarily, but I got over the relationship really fast because I realized that that's not what I want in my life. I want something bigger and better. And you're a perfect example of that because you did go from the ultimate low. And again, I feel like we were probably pretty similar in our positioning to all of a sudden figuring it all out. And I mean, look at you now.
So fun. You guys, it's so fun to live your bigger and better life. Which reminds me, Shay, I wanted to ask two kind of questions to you that I like. If you don't feel comfortable answering them, you don't have to. But you talk about realizing that you weren't yourself for the last 3 years. So, what's it been like trying on who you actually are in the last couple of months? Well, how has that been?
It's like, and I hate to use a racing an analogy, so I'll do it like you're breathing through a straw, right? In racing, we have these things called restrictors, and they limit how much air can go into the engine, which is how much power the engine can make, and ultimately how fast the car can go. It feels like all of a sudden the restrictor's off, and instead of breathing through a straw, I'm breathing normally again. And it's kind of funny because living in Utah, it's harder to breathe when you're exercising and stuff. So it takes a while to adjust to that. But being myself again, it's like a light switch went off. And it was an immediate change when I walked through my front door for the first time, when I was sitting there working on puzzles. But it's been such a it's been a good thing and a bad thing. It's been a bad thing because I'm sad about the 3 years that I wasn't me and that I didn't listen to the people around me who told me I was different, because I didn't believe them. And I felt like, well, COVID, everything going on, there's so much. And all of a sudden, I'm not spending time with people that I used to spend a lot of time with. So, of course, they're going to tell me I'm different because they're not seeing the side of me that they normally do. But it also is just this sense of, yeah, okay, I can do anything. It doesn't matter. My opinion is the only one that really matters. And that's one thing that we all need to remember, because it doesn't matter what other people think of you. Ultimately, it's what you think of you. So if you're happy with who you are, then that's one thing. But if anyone else is like, hey, you're not quite normal, maybe take a step back and do a deep dive into if there is something to that.
So good. And I think too, what's fascinating about that is when people are telling you that, it doesn't, especially people who are close to you, it doesn't mean you have to dismiss it, but it doesn't mean you have to take it on, right?
Yeah.
And even if you are like, you know what, I haven't been myself, and we start looking and it's like that's just a learning experience. Like reflecting back to you based off of what I'm seeing from the outside, right? Is it's like I tried on this version for 3 years and it felt misaligned and I didn't wake up to that until 3 years later. But at least I tried it on and I can say I tried it on kind of like at the beginning. You're like, I don't regret it, but it's also just not the life that I want to choose moving forward.
Yeah, it felt completely static because the person that I was for all that time was just the person who I thought he wanted in his life. And it's not even someone, honestly, who exists anymore. I don't know who she is. And it was a very amorphous kind of lump, not even a being, but there was no strength to it. There was no individuality. And yes, I still am my own person. I've always been in charge of my life. And that's one thing that's been very interesting to go through all this because you talk about having the scales of desire and attachment. Well, there's never been attachment to my ex because he's never been dependent on my future. I've always been in charge of my future. And I always felt like I was going to be alone. And then all of a sudden he came in my life and he like wormed his way in. And so that kind of changed things for me, but I've never allowed anyone else to control my future. I live alone. I love my place. Like I figure out my own finances. This is how life is. So when you talk about the cherry on top of this great big ice cream sundae, that's how I've always viewed it. And it's just strange that for 3 years, I was vanilla. I was vanilla ice cream. And it's like not even good vanilla ice cream, but just like, you know, the crappy stuff that you get on sale at Publix. I know that because I've been there for a long time, but I'm actually like moose tracks or half baked or cookie dough. Like I'm a special ice cream and I deserve to be treated that way. And so it's like this weird thing of the person I was that horrible vanilla, and I don't even know how to go back to that.
It's like once you wake up, you open your eyes, you can't unsee it.
Exactly.
And it's so easy. I do want to just tell everyone who's listening, it's so easy to like accidentally do kind of what she's talking about, where we start to form ourselves into trying to form ourselves into the perfect partner for this specific person, right? Because it's kind of masked as compromise or like, oh, well, he does this and I want to spend time with him. So therefore I'm going to do those things with him, even if there's not necessarily like an interest there. And and it seems like a good thing. And I wouldn't even say that it's a bad thing, right? I don't believe in good or bad or right or wrong, but it's easy to accidentally slip into that to an extreme instead of like a balance. And don't beat yourself up if you find yourself there, because I think we all do at one place in our life. And then once we realize it, we can course correct. And sometimes relationships work out in that course correction, and sometimes they don't, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So
And
important.
and to that point, to people out there who find themselves slipping into that pattern of doing whatever their ex like to do or having done that, just because it's their thing and then you guys break up doesn't mean it has to still be their thing. You get to keep it too. And that's part of what I've done with living in Utah. Like, this is still, I love this place. This place is heaven to me. Just because it's where he's from and he lives 15 minutes away doesn't mean I'm moving. And the number of people who have asked me, like, oh, well, are you going back to Florida? I'm like, no, I've found happiness out here. And
I'm so proud of you. I'm
well,
so
thank you.
proud of you. That is so important. Everybody, I hope you heard that. Just because you learned that you liked something with your ex doesn't mean that it's his or her thing. It can also be yours. So important. I love that because that reminds me of the portal possibility, right? That to me was boating, right? My ex took me fishing and boating on the Gulf, and I fell in love. And I'm like, I always want to be able to do that regardless of whether or not I'm with him. So that's happening. And that happens now for me where I'm on the boat and I can go fishing. I can do all those things anytime I want. And it's not his thing, it's like my thing.
Exactly. Just because they introduce you to something you love doesn't mean that it's theirs to keep.
Good. I love that. Shay, I love it. Your conversation is so great. Before we hop off, I just wanted to ask, is there something you'd like to share with someone who's possibly going through what you went through now? As someone who's been on the other side of it now, like, is there anything you'd like to share? Words of wisdom, any little nugget that you wish you would have heard when you were kind of in the thick of it?
You don't have to follow any schedule and you don't have to feel bad for feeling anything because there's one point where Dorothy, I know you said, you're addicted to your ex and you're in withdrawal from him, especially or him or her, especially given when you guys are together for a long time. So there's no guilt in feeling any way that you do. There's no there's no sadness or shame in wanting that person back in your life. And just because you don't feel fixed yet doesn't mean you won't start to feel better.
I love that. Can we just say that one more time? Just because you don't feel fixed yet doesn't mean you won't feel better. Can we put that in a quote box on Pinterest? So good. Hashtag Shay. I love it. Amazing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming on. I know the Bravehearts listening are going to be like, thank you so much. We appreciate hearing your journey and all the words of wisdom you shared. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you and the community that you've made. And for anyone thinking about doing the program, just do it. It honestly makes such a big difference. And even if you work a crazy job with a crazy schedule, the curriculum works for you as long as you put in the work for it.
Oh, I love it. So good. Thank you so much, Shay. I appreciate you. If you're loving the How to Get Over Your Ex podcast and you want to learn how to get over your ex in 3 months or less to build a life better than the one you thought you had with your ex, I would like to personally invite you to my next group course where we take everything you've learned here on the podcast and apply it to your life. Come check it out at www.lifecoachdorothy.com.